The idea that survival depends on firepower sounds convincing at first. It's loud, dramatic, and easy to picture. Weapons feel like control. They look like power. But strip away the noise, the fantasy, and the adrenaline, and something much quieter starts to matter more. Something that doesn't look impressive on camera and doesn't make headlines, but decides who actually keeps breathing days, weeks, and months later. Because in any long-term collapse, the biggest threat isn't always another person. It's the body turning against itself after something small goes wrong. A cut, a tear, a puncture, not dramatic, not cinematic, just enough to let bacteria in. That's where the difference starts to show. A weapon can stop a threat in seconds, but it can't stop an infection that's already inside. It can't close a wound. It can't slow down the quiet spread of bacteria moving through tissue. And it definitely can't prevent something minor from becoming fatal over time. History makes this brutally clear. Before modern medicine, people didn't just die from battles or major injuries. They died afterward. They died from wounds that didn't heal properly. They died from infections that started small and spiraled out of control. A scratch could turn into something deadly. A simple cut could mean weeks of suffering followed by a slow decline. That pattern doesn't disappear in a collapse. It comes back stronger. Without hospitals, without antibiotics, without trained medical staff, the margin for error shrinks fast. Suddenly, the body is on its own again. And unless someone nearby knows how to step in, things go downhill quickly. That's where wound closure becomes more than just a skill. It becomes leverage over time. An open wound is an open door. Dirt, bacteria, moisture, everything finds its way in. The longer it stays open, the higher the chance something goes wrong. Closing that wound properly changes the outcome. It reduces exposure. It helps the body focus on healing instead of fighting off contamination from every direction. And here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. Most injuries in a survival scenario aren't dramatic. They're not gunshot wounds or massive trauma. They're everyday accidents. Slipping, cutting something the wrong way, getting caught on sharp edges. Small things that happen more often when conditions are rough and resources are limited. Those small injuries add up. One untreated cut might not seem like much, but leave it exposed, let it get infected, and suddenly energy drains faster. Movement becomes harder. Pain increases. Focus drops. And now survival becomes a lot more difficult, not because of an external threat, but because the body is struggling internally. That's the shift most people underestimate. Weapons deal with moments. Medical skills deal with consequences, and consequences last longer. Think about the timeline. A confrontation might last seconds or minutes. The aftermath of an untreated wound can stretch into days or weeks. That's where survival actually gets decided. Not in the flash of action, but in the slow grind that follows. Closing a wound isn't just about stitching skin together. It's about controlling that timeline. It's about reducing the window where things can go wrong. It's about giving the body a chance to recover instead of forcing it to fight a losing battle. There's also a psychological edge that comes with it. Panic spreads fast when someone is injured and no one knows what to do. That uncertainty makes everything worse. Decisions get rushed. Mistakes happen. But when someone understands how to handle the situation, everything shifts. Movements slow down. Focus sharpens. The situation becomes manageable instead of overwhelming. That kind of stability matters more than it seems. Because survival isn't just physical. It's mental too. And being able to handle injuries changes how people behave around risk. It creates a buffer. It allows for smarter decisions instead of desperate ones. It turns chaos into something that can be worked through step by step. There's also the value it brings to a group. In any long-term scenario, being useful matters. And usefulness isn't always about strength or combat ability. It's about what someone can provide when things go wrong. A person who can treat injuries becomes essential. Not because it's flashy, but because it keeps people functioning. It keeps the group moving. It prevents small problems from becoming catastrophic ones. And over time, That adds up to something much bigger than any single moment of defense. It becomes sustainability. Another detail that often gets overlooked is resource efficiency. Weapons rely on ammunition, maintenance, and parts that eventually run out or break down. Medical knowledge, on the other hand, scales differently. It adapts. It works with what's available. Even basic tools can become effective in the right hands. A simple needle and thread, when used correctly, can mean the difference between recovery and decline. That doesn't mean every wound should be closed. Knowing when not to act is just as important as knowing how to act. Some wounds need to stay open to drain properly. Closing the wrong type of injury can trap infection inside, making things worse instead of better. That's where understanding matters more than tools. Because tools without knowledge don't solve problems. They create new ones. And this is where the gap becomes obvious. A lot of people prepare for conflict. Fewer prepare for aftermath. Even fewer prepare for the slow, quiet challenges that don't look dangerous until it's too late. The truth is, survival isn't decided by what happens at peak intensity. It's decided by what happens after everything calms down. When the adrenaline fades. When the injury starts to set in. When there's no help coming. That's when the real test begins. And that's when a skill like wound closure stops being optional and starts becoming essential. Because in that moment, it's not about winning a fight. It's about staying alive long enough to heal. And that changes everything. Once the immediate danger passes, the focus shifts whether anyone is ready for it or not. The body doesn't care about strategy or preparation in the abstract. It reacts to damage in real time. Blood loss, exposure, contamination. These are the things that quietly take over if nothing is done. And here's where things become brutally practical. Without access to modern care, even a manageable injury can spiral simply because it isn't handled correctly in the first few moments. That window matters more than most realize. It's not just about stopping bleeding, it's about what happens next. Because stopping the bleeding is only step one. What follows determines whether the person recovers or declines. Leaving a wound open might seem safer in the moment, especially without full medical supplies, but that choice comes with consequences. The longer tissue is exposed, the more opportunity bacteria has to settle in. And once infection takes hold, it doesn't just sit still. It spreads, it deepens, it complicates everything. Energy that should be going toward healing gets redirected into fighting infection. Strength fades faster, recovery slows down, and in a survival environment where every bit of energy matters, that drain can be the difference between keeping up and falling behind. That's why proper closure, when appropriate, changes the trajectory entirely. It creates a controlled environment. It reduces exposure. It allows the body to do what it's built to do without constant interference from outside contaminants. It's not perfect, and it doesn't eliminate risk completely, but it shifts the odds. And survival is often about shifting odds, not eliminating danger. There's also the reality that injuries rarely happen at convenient times. They don't wait for ideal conditions. They happen when tools are limited, when stress is high, and when decisions have to be made quickly. That's why familiarity with the process matters more than perfection. It's about being capable under pressure, not flawless in theory. Understanding how to bring the edges of a wound together, how to reduce tension on the skin, how to avoid making things worse. These are details that don't seem urgent until they are. And when they are, there's no time to learn from scratch. Another layer to this is how injuries affect mobility. Even a relatively small wound can make movement painful or inefficient. That slows everything down. Travel takes longer. Tasks become harder. Risk increases because the body isn't operating at full capacity. Closing and stabilizing that wound early helps preserve function. And function is survival. Because survival isn't just about staying alive in a static sense. It's about continuing to move, adapt, and respond. Anything that interferes with that becomes a liability over time. There's also a chain reaction that happens within a group when injuries aren't handled properly. One injured person can affect everyone. Resources get diverted. Time gets lost. Morale drops. The group becomes less effective as a whole. On the other hand, When injuries are managed quickly and effectively, the group stabilizes faster. Recovery becomes part of the process instead of a disruption. That kind of resilience builds momentum over time. What often goes unnoticed is how quickly small setbacks can stack when there's no system to handle them. A minor delay turns into a missed opportunity. A missed opportunity turns into added risk. And that added risk compounds until the situation becomes harder to control. When injuries linger, decision-making starts to shift in subtle ways. People become more cautious, sometimes overly cautious, and that hesitation can create new problems. Movement slows, plans change, and the margin for error gets thinner with every passing day. There's also the physical toll of carrying unresolved injuries, where even basic tasks begin to feel heavier and more exhausting. Over time, that fatigue spreads beyond the injured individual and affects the entire group dynamic. People start compensating, taking on extra responsibilities, and that imbalance creates strain. On the flip side, when wounds are handled early and effectively, it preserves not just physical ability, but also confidence. Confidence leads to better coordination, clearer communication, and stronger group cohesion. It allows people to stay focused on forward progress instead of constantly reacting to setbacks. Another overlooked factor is how recovery time influences long-term planning. Faster recovery means more flexibility, more options, and a greater ability to adapt to changing conditions. It keeps momentum intact and prevents stagnation from taking hold. There's also a psychological reassurance that comes from knowing injuries can be managed, which reduces fear and hesitation in critical moments. That mental clarity becomes a quiet advantage, especially when conditions are unpredictable. Over time, these small advantages begin to separate those who can sustain themselves from those who gradually fall behind. It's not about dramatic wins, but about avoiding slow losses that build up unnoticed. And in a prolonged scenario, avoiding those losses becomes just as important as securing any immediate gains. If this changed how survival is viewed, subscribe for more content that focuses on what actually matters when things go wrong, and share this with someone who takes preparedness seriously.